Well, hello there. Welcome back. I'll talk if you'll listen to episode 58, two away from 60. Welcome back. Tim here. I am so excited to be with all of you on this day as I have so much to share. A few different things that have happened. I'm making some readjustments to the office, and it's actually starting to feel a little bit studio-esque, and we'll see where this goes. But I've ordered some stuff, got some stuff on the way, some stuff that has arrived, and I actually, for the most part, finished rearranging it, and I'm really happy about how it looks right now. There are some key core components of the office that have stayed the same, but there are some changes, and I can't wait to share that with you. So, for all of my long-time listeners, hello. For all of my first-time listeners, hello. And I guess I'll start this episode by saying what I've been up to. So let's start with something that I did literally before I ate dinner tonight, and that's I took a small step outside of my comfort zone. It wasn't a huge step. It wasn't something revolutionary, but I'm all about looking at some ways that I can make the show better, more engaging, and while also not putting too much food on my plate, so to speak. So no matter how much you can eat, no matter how fast your metabolism is, a lot of food is still a lot of food. And I want to make sure I can put all of these different areas into bite-sized chunks instead of a full meal, so to speak. So I did some research, and one of the things let's start with the challenge, right? Let's start with the problem, and then we'll talk about the solution. So the problem with me was I have no problem on an episode like this episode, on an episode like previous episodes, where I just get behind the microphone, I hit record, and I start talking to you all. I have no problem doing that. It's really fun. I get lost in the moment sometimes, and honestly, it is something I really look forward to. This whole podcast journey quite literally has been one of the best moments of my life in growth, and I'm really excited to keep that piece of it going. But like many of you know, some of which you know more than others, having an interviewee or a guest on the show is just next level. It brings a new level of energy. It brings a new level of chemistry. It just brings fun to the show that, honestly, I don't think I'll ever get used to. I think a lot of people, especially when they have been interviewing guests for a really long time, may take that for granted. Me personally, I still look forward to it as if it's my first interview, and I'm really excited to explore avenues and opportunities to get more of you on the show. Now, sometimes it just takes for a normal call to action, right? Some of you have heard my pleas for guests on the show, and you reached out and you've gotten on the show. But many of my interviews, I've reached out to people, and it can take a lot of time, energy, and effort. Obviously, my work schedule isn't the same as other people's work schedule, so there's that. There's COVID, so obviously you got to consider that. Luckily, all of my interviews have been phone interviews, but you also have to consider a person's environment. Are they in a situation where they can talk? I had one young lady do an interview while in the car. She was literally in the car in order to make arrangements for it because she couldn't be in a controlled environment. And there was a lot going on. So to make things work for the interview, she stayed in the car and did it. And actually, now that I think about it, this young lady wasn't the only young lady who I had on the show who had to do an interview from the car. So I thought to myself, okay, how can I get more guests for the show without pumping too much time into it? And I don't know if the government spied on that thought and they pulled that thought out of the waves in the air and all of a sudden I got advertisements for it, or if it was just perfect timing. But I came across something on my Instagram feed called Matchmaker. Actually, it could have been a YouTube ad. I don't remember which one it was, but it basically said, do you want to get guests for your show, or do you have a difficult time having guests on your show? And I kind of took a step back and I thought about it. First things first, when you take a look at Instagram ads, Facebook ads, Twitter ads, whatever the ads are in any social outlet, before you become a creator, a business owner, entrepreneur, a philanthropist, et cetera, you look at ads as a nuisance, right? You just look at them as an inconvenience. You just look at them as that wrapping over the gift that you want to get to. You want to tear it to shreds. You want to get it out of the way before you can get to the gift. It's the bread surrounding the gooey center of the donut, right? It's something that you just want to get out of the way, or something that you kind of just tolerate until you can get to what you really want to do. But as someone who relies on ads to support the show, as someone who is now a creator, a podcaster, someone who has a YouTube channel and is looking to grow it, someone who is very much into charity and community service, you start to take a different viewpoint on promotion and advertisements and what potential feedback or exposure that it can get you and give you. And all that to say, when I see ads, especially if it's a startup, I go and research it. I don't necessarily, and this is just me being stubborn, I don't necessarily click on it because I don't want them to get that virtual or digital, I got you, that's just me being in my head. But I still go and Google it. I still go and do research, which is essentially the same thing. They got my attention, and now I'm looking into them. And I came across this podcasting platform that's designed to pair podcasters with guests. And many of the guests are of the podcasting community, or they could just be creators in other fields and other areas that are just looking to get their work out. And it's called Matchmaker. FM, I want to say, matchmaker.fm. Forget exactly what it was. Again, I just signed up for it. And I thought, hey, why not? Obviously, you can't expect different results by doing the same things, right? I think the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting different results. Take that in its most basic example. You can't continuously hope to eat the same things and continuously hope not to change your eating habits and lifestyle habits and expect to just lose weight, right? Even if it's something destructive, like you take drugs, right? Even if that's something that's not productive and destructive, it is a step outside of your routine, right? So you can't keep doing the same things expecting different things to happen. So with that said, I'm like, hey, let me take a step outside of my comfort zone and let me sign up for this. Let me see if I can get some guests on the show. So depending on when I get finished this episode and when I'm done my editing and how I feel tonight, I do plan on getting up earlier tomorrow. So depending on how I feel tonight, I may actually browse the website a little bit, but I spent probably about maybe 45 minutes to an hour on my profile, and you have two different profiles. You can add a show. So obviously I added my podcast, and you can update or edit your guest profile. So not only can you go on and look for guests, people can look for you and have you on as guests, and they can reach out to you on that platform. So I'm really looking forward to what this brings. And for those of you out there who maybe you have a podcast, maybe you have a YouTube channel, maybe you have a business, if you can figure out what the problem is, that's the first step to working towards the solution. So my problem, not enough guests for the show. And quite honestly, it's not a huge problem, but it's a problem nonetheless. Even if I only want to do one interview a month, that's still an interview that I have to spend time, energy, and effort on something that I'm not getting paid for, at least not a large amount for. So it takes time. And that was the problem. The solution, okay, what can I do to increase my exposure outside of you all? You all have done a really great job. My buddy Sam earlier today, the same Sam that was featured on our retail episode, reached out to me and said, "Hey, I've been sharing the episode, and Sam, I really appreciate you for that." There are several others who share the episode. My buddy Dell shares the episode, and I have a few friends and family who do a really good job of supporting the show. But outside of you all, how am I increasing exposure? What am I doing for the longevity of the show? And I think this is a step in the right direction, and I cannot wait to see what we get as a result of it. And honestly, worst case scenario, if I don't really increase the interview routine or the interview frequency as a result of doing this, then now I know that the Matchmaker website wasn't the one that worked. Now that's one box I can check and say, okay, this didn't work. And honestly, I'll be at where I'm at now. So no loss, only gain. And I think it's very minimal risk, and I'm really looking forward to see what the next step will be in regards to more guests on the show. The next thing I did is The Office. I spoke a little bit about it already, and I mentioned it in a few episodes back, but I am trying to focus on my brand, and this podcast is a hobby. It'll always be a hobby, and if I get paid from it, if I ever get to the point where this is my main source of income and I can make a living off of the podcast, that's just icing on top of the cake, right? This podcast is huge for me. It helps me speak to many of you, some of which I don't know, some of which I do know, in a way that I don't think I ever really could. And this podcast has opened up so many doors for me in a sense of bonding and creating and recreating connections with a lot of you that listen. And that's amazing. However, I don't want it to stop there. Obviously, I started a YouTube channel at the suggestion and feedback of a lot of you. And I'm slowly starting to build that channel. And as a result, I really want to give you guys some really good content. So in order to, a part of being able to provide good content is being comfortable. And I feel like one of the ways I can be comfortable is to turn this office from a hobby space to a productivity space. So I think right now it's really starting to come together. I have, a bookshelves with books on there, both science fiction, leadership development, self-improvement. I have an awesome display area with several different collector's editions and art books and figurines and some other achievements. And I have my comics on display. I've changed the lighting in the office. I moved the couch to a different area. I finally got a desk. So I have an L desk that I'm really happy for, or happy to have. And I'm really excited to take the brand, the YouTube channel, Tim, to the very next level. And I really can't wait for you all to be a part of this journey with me. Some of you, if you haven't already seen it, you can go to my Instagram page and watch an IGTV video that I posted, or you can go to my Twitter page and see a video that I posted. And you can see I'm not afraid to experiment. I normally record videos in front of the TV so that way you can see the latest episode out, but I decided to record the episode in front of my display shelves, and it was a nice change of pace. It was really nice to mix it up, and I'm not afraid to do that, and I'm really looking forward to the different ways I can mix up my content. And honestly, I'm excited, y'all. I'm feeling reinvigorated. I'm feeling re-energized. I'm feeling re-inspired. And I think this is a good thing. And I at least want to ride this wave until it goes away. you all know how I've been dealing with depression or stress in other areas that may have stifled the growth of the show. So right now, when I'm feeling positive and I'm feeling, like full steam ahead, I want to ride this wave of positivity. I want to ride this wave of energy. I'm sure a lot of you have had those moments before, right? Where you're just in a rhythm, whether it's chores around the house, whether it's at work, whether it's that workout routine at the gym, or you're going for a run, or whatever the case may be. You hit that rhythm and nothing can stop you. You feel like you're an unstoppable force. I'm starting to get inklings of that. And I'm really excited to see where this energy will apply to the show. So hopefully I can come up with some really good content for you all. I got some ideas brewing. One of my favorite artists of all time, J. Cole, said, "Hey, if they don't know your dreams, then they can't shoot them down." Now, I don't agree with that entirely, but the part that I'm relating to right now is, hey, real G's move in silence like lasagna. I can't tell you everything that I'm up to because I'm still working some things out and ideas change. But when these things do finally come to fruition and you do get to see them and hear them and be a part of them, I know I'm going to be super happy. I know I'm going to be on a new high, so to speak. So, with that said, let's take a really quick break. Let's go and pay some bills. We talked about ads earlier. Let's go and pay some bills, and I'll be right back, and we can roll right into tonight's topic right after this. Hey, everybody, welcome back. Thanks for tolerating the break. And I just have so much more space, y'all. When y'all see my first video that includes the desk on the YouTube channel, you'll see what I'm talking about. But I just have so much more space. I have my laptop up here. I have the iPad up with my notes in front of me. I feel like a professional. I'm really excited, and I can't wait to share this with you all. But anyway, so tonight's topic is vaccinations, specifically as it pertains to the novel coronavirus, otherwise known as COVID-19. Now, for those of you who may not be too in tune or too in touch with the media and with news surrounding COVID-19, or if you're just drained at this point, so you needed to take a step away, there has been news of a vaccine on the horizon. Now, to get the obvious out the way, of course, this isn't something that's going to happen overnight. It's not something that's going to be available by the time you listen to this episode. And of course, when it is available, it'll be very limited supply. Obviously, you have a priority list of who gets it. Obviously, certain politicians and first responders and essential workers will be at the top of the list. Then, of course, you have people who are at high risk for contracting the novel coronavirus. And once things get a little bit regulated, it gets a little bit more manageable and costs and supply and demand gets worked out, it'll be available to the general public. It'll be something, hopefully, within the next several months and years, something as normal and as regulated as the flu vaccine. Now, vaccines, now I can speak specifically within the Black community, but there are a lot of people out there who don't believe in vaccines, right? They don't believe that they work. They don't believe that they are effective. And in fact, some of them believe that they are the opposite of effective. Some people believe that they are the direct result of some irreversible and horrible conditions, disease. And let me say this. Anyone who's been listening to this show know that I am very fair. I am very objective. And I try my very best to, if not empathize for the most part, at least at minimum, sympathize with the other viewpoint. However, I will be first to say that I totally disagree with a specific viewpoint. Now, I will never personally attack anybody. I think I kind of alluded to this a bit when we started talking about Trump and Biden and Democrat versus Republican, et cetera, et cetera. I have a friend of mine who is very vocal about voting for Trump. And I think a lot of people can look at that and go, because you do this, that means this. Because you do X, that means Y. And I don't think life is that simple and that straightforward. If it was, great. We would know exactly who to invite and uninvite from the cookout, right? But life isn't that straightforward. X doesn't always mean Y. And I have a friend who is very vocal about his support for Trump, but he's a great guy. He's paid for drinks. He's helped me in financial need. He's been a shoulder to cry on, figuratively speaking, because I'm a thug. I don't cry. No tears shed over here on this side. But no, all seriously, in all seriousness, he's a good friend. I've known him for some years now, and his political opinions and desires and outcomes are his. Just because someone likes comics doesn't mean they don't know how to wash their butt, right? Just because somebody works as an electrician doesn't mean that they dropped out of college. Just because someone is renting doesn't mean they have poor credit. X doesn't always mean Y. And I think I would like, especially those of you who are considered to be my peers, whether that be black men, whether that be millennials, whether that be people in their 30s in particular, whatever demographic you choose, I would like to think that my peers hopefully can work towards this state of having a respectful opinion, or rather respecting other people's opinion, and not attack the person for disagreeing. So let me sit here and say I'm pro-vaccination. I haven't seen anything that has convinced me that vaccines are poor, vaccines are bad, and vaccines are not the way to go. And if someone disagrees with that, I would say that the idea to me is silly, and that to have that opinion confuses me. But I would never say that somebody is, certain words I can't say on the podcast here, but I would never call someone out of their name. I would, unless of course someone's angry. You're angry. That's an emotional reaction, right? Doesn't make it right, but it happens. We sometimes let our emotions get the best of us. But in a typical normal scenario, I'm never going to insult someone's character. I'm never going to insult someone's family or well-being. I'm never going to wish death or injury or illness on somebody just because they share a different opinion from me. Like, I think that's so immature. That's like the lowest of low, to call somebody out of their name, to insult their character, to get them fired from a job, to help them take food off their family's table, to open their family up to scrutiny because they share a different opinion than I do. Now, of course, there's always exceptions to every rule, and I'm sitting here thinking about 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, and I'm hosting some show. This audio bit will be coming back to bite me in the butt, right? But hopefully it doesn't. But let me say this. If someone comes to me and says, aquamarine is the best color known to man, I can sit here and argue the point. I can argue how a certain percentage of the population can't even see aquamarine or distinguish aquamarine, doesn't even know what aquamarine is as a color. But I would never call that person an idiot. I would never say that they probably raised idiots. I would never say that that person is a heartless jerk because they have a different opinion than I do. I would like to think that if I did do any of that, I would have a better reason than I just don't like what they said. And I think to live in a world where it's completely, first of all, let me say, having free speech is amazing. We're one of the only, if not the only country that has it written into the foundation of our law. Free speech is essential to debate, to growth, to being uncomfortable, because that's how you grow in the first place. And I think that's amazing. And for someone to be able to get on Twitter or go outside and call me a jerk, I think that's beautiful, and I will always fight for that right. However, I very strongly disagree with somebody making a judgment on someone's character and calling them out of their name just because they share a different opinion. So, we're going to get into this whole vaccination discussion, and I'm going to share my opinion on vaccines. But let me say this. If you're listening to the show and you ever disagree with me, I don't think of you any less of you as a person. I don't think any more of you as a person. If you agree with me, I won't put you on a pedestal or treat you any differently than I do now. So, with that out of the way, let's talk about, before we go to the facts, because we got a few things up that I'm going to take a look at. We have websites with definitions of what a vaccination is. We have studies, we have articles, we have myths, we have a lot of different things. And the goal of this episode, the goal of this discussion point, is not to convince you that vaccines are good. It is not to convince you that you should think what I think. By no means is that the goal of this episode. The goal of this episode, as with many episodes of this show, is purely insightfulness, that's a word, education, and enlightenment. That's all this is for. You are entitled to have your own opinion. I just think every opinion, especially as it pertains to the health of not only you, me, you, us, we, but those of us who have people who are around them that we care about, and even people you don't care about. Health is really important, and I think it's really crucial to have an educated opinion on something. To just wake up and say, you know what, vaccines are bad, or vaccines are good, with no research and no knowledge, I think is utterly irresponsible and very immature. I think the first step of having an opinion on anything, well, an educated opinion, so to speak, is regardless of how you feel, you should at least be able to define what it is that you have an opinion about and how it works. Would you all agree that that's fair? That if you can't describe it, if you can't define it, if you can't say what it is, and you can't describe how it works on a basic level. I'm not saying, get into the engineering or the technology or the biology or the chemistry, of how an advanced level of how something works. No. At its basic level, are you able to describe it, how it works, what it is? I think that is the first step to having an educated opinion. I think when you wake up and say vaccines are good, and you wake up and say vaccines are bad, and you can't define what a vaccine even is, your only definition of a vaccine is it's a shot that they give you, I would argue, how do you know? How do you know that it's bad? How do you know that it's good? To just say something is good just for the sake of saying it's good, I think is extremely ignorant and very dangerous. To say, oh, praying is good, it's what you're supposed to do just because you were told. Saying, hey, eating something before it expires, before the expiration date, is good just because it has an expiration date on there. Saying that, hey, you should never rent, you should always own, is good just because that's what's always been told to you. I think, again, very irresponsible, very immature, and very dangerous. Likewise, for the inverse, saying something is bad just because that's what you were taught to believe, or that just because that's what you feel. I think is just the same. And let's start with some definitions. So let's go and look. Let's use a very powerful tool that is both amazing and very dangerous. Let's use something called the internet. And let's take a look at the CDC website on what a vaccination is. And then we're going to actually take a look at the literal definition according to, I want to say, Merriam-Webster or dictionary.com. So let's start with the facts. This has nothing to do with opinion. Everything that I'm going to read is factual. I've also tried my very best to go to .org websites, websites that are a little bit more reliable. I mean, they got to go through certain credentials to get that .org designation. So this is directly from the CDC. Now, one last thing. I'm sorry. I know I'm dragging this out. If you don't trust the government, and I'm not saying fully, but if you don't trust the government, I think it's really lazy to say, oh, what you're reading isn't true because I don't trust where it's coming from. I think it's really lazy. It's your right to say, hey, I don't trust that source. That's your right. But I think it's really irresponsible and very lazy to say something like, this is a questionable source. When millions upon millions of organizations and people rely on this website or this company, this organization for guidance. But anyway, I digress. So, according to the CDC's website, vaccines contain the same germs that cause disease. For example, a measles vaccine contains measles, and HIV, B as in Bravo, vaccine contains HIV bacteria. But they have been either killed or weakened to the point that they don't make you sick. Some vaccines contain only a part of the disease germ. A vaccine stimulates your immune system to produce antibodies, exactly like it would if you were exposed to the disease. After getting vaccinated, you develop immunity to the disease without having to get the disease first. This is what makes vaccines such powerful medicine. Unlike most medicines, which treat or cure diseases, vaccines prevent them. Now, I just want to break this down on a very basic level. And this is kind of like what I'm talking about. Before I can form, and I want to be really, really clear, not an opinion, because it's your right to have an opinion on anything. I mean, you can wake up and have an opinion on something that you know very little about. But in order to have an educated opinion, I think you must first know what it is and, again, how it works. So let's break down what we just read. Basically, in Tim's own words, a vaccination is a part of something that makes you sick, but it won't make you sick because it's not strong enough to do that. It's not powerful enough to make you sick. It's been weakened, or as the article or definition alluded to, destroyed or killed. It won't be as effective as the full thing or it being at 100%. So here's a really basic example. Let's say there was a vaccine for the common cold. And there's not, but getting a cold and getting sick is something that all of us have had to deal with or at least have to worry about. So I think this is a really good example that most people can relate to. So let's say everyone has to get sick at least one time before they won't catch a cold anymore. So everybody's cold symptoms are different. So let's say you go out and you get sick. You have a sore throat, you cough, you sneeze, you have a runny nose, you have a headache. Everything is just going south. Nothing is going right for you and you not physically feel well. Your appetite is all over the place. you feel weak and fatigued, you have a cold, you're really sick. Now, let's say you have to go through that, however long you have to go through that before you're immune to it completely. So whether you're sick for a day, or whether you're sick for a week, or whether you're sick for a month, you have to go through that before you won't be sick again. Here's another caveat. Let's say you could die, or let's say you could receive permanent damage during your sickness, during your illness. Let's take it a step further, and let's say that you could pass that very same risk of death onto family and loved ones, and even complete strangers. But once you make it through that period of sickness, of illness, you're completely immune. You don't get sick anymore. You don't catch a cold anymore. You can't pass it along to anybody else who is also immune, right? Would you say the risk of death, the risk of your child's death, the risk of your mother, your father, your sister, your brother's death, your coworker's death, the kids at the rec center, their death, would you say that that risk is worth you going through that period for immunity? Some of you might say, well, yeah, I'll isolate myself. I'll make sure I won't get anybody else sick. I'll stay in the house. Okay, great. But just because you're immune doesn't mean the people around you are immune. So you can carry something but not have any side effects because essentially you're okay, and still pass something on to somebody else, and they can have a different reaction than you did. A vaccine is you getting that common cold at a lesser potency. So it's not as powerful. So you're basically a little sick, if at all. And your body goes, oh, okay, I know how to deal with this now. And it prevents you from ever getting sick in the first place. So you don't have to go through that risk. That's essentially what a vaccine is. So to give another example, we all know people that are really difficult to deal with. And whether they're friends or family members or even coworkers, we know that we have to deal with them in doses, right? We can't take them all of the time. Imagine knowing what to prepare for. Imagine knowing, hey, cousin Johnny is going to be here at Christmas dinner, at Thanksgiving dinner, at 7 p.m. He's bringing his 5th girlfriend in 2 years. He is crazy. He's going to be drunk. He's going to bring up these 5 topics of conversation, yada, yada, yada. Now you got your game plan. Now you can say, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and this is how I'm going to react. Imagine not knowing that. Imagine Johnny just popping up at the door for an event that you're having, and now you're like, I got to let him in. I got to deal with him, but I don't know what to expect. It's almost like a complete stranger. When you invite a friend over, you know what to expect for the most part from that friend. When you invite a stranger over, let's say a friend of a friend, you have no idea what to expect. The vaccine is the friend that you're used to, or at least that you can become used to. The stranger is life without the vaccine. You don't know what you're getting into. You don't know how you're going to react, etc., etc. So that's the basics of a vaccine. And again, regardless of what your opinion on it is, you should at least be able to define it. So with that in mind, let's move on over to the actual definition of it, according to Merriam-Webster. A preparation of killed microorganisms, living attenuated organisms, or living fully virulent organisms that is administered to produce or artificially increase immunity to a particular disease. So that's the definition, what it is. I would imagine that no one pulled this definition out of nowhere, but that's what the definition is. So now that we're able to define it, And now we're able to basically, on a basic level, define how it works and explain how it works. I think now at this point we can form an educated opinion about what a vaccine is. And if you're listening and you weren't able to describe what a vaccine is and you weren't able to explain how it works, hopefully this gives you an opportunity to be able to do that and maybe articulate your opinion and your stance a little bit better. I can't tell you how many people cannot explain things the way that they would like to. And on the surface, it kind of sounds like they don't know what they're talking about or they don't really know much about a topic. Hopefully, this has helped to fill that gap, so to speak. And you'll be able to have more productive discussions, to say the least. Speaking of productive discussions, we're going to roll on over to some myths. There are some myths that I think are overtaking a lot of our opinions about vaccinations. And I want to talk about those and see what some websites have to say. I'll be back right after this. Hey everybody, welcome back. So let's talk myths. Let's talk myths about vaccines and vaccinations, and we are on publichealth.org, and we're reading a health guide surrounding vaccinations, and in particular, vaccine myths. So let's go ahead and read this, starting at the top. Vaccine myths debunked. U.S. public health officials and physicians have been combating misconceptions about vaccine safety for over 20 years. They've had mixed success, despite the fact that numerous studies have found no evidence to support the notion that vaccines cause autism and other chronic illnesses. A growing number of parents are refusing to vaccinate their children. Researchers now link falling immunization rates to recent resurgences of vaccine-preventable diseases. In 2010, California saw 9,120 cases of whooping cough, more than any year since the whooping cough vaccine was introduced in the 1940s. 10 infants too young to be vaccinated died of whooping cough during the outbreak. The CDC warns that events like these will become more frequent and harder to control if vaccination rates continue to fall. Fears over the safety of vaccines are understandable. The CDC vaccination schedule calls for children to receive up to 14 inoculations by the age of 6. Many of them are vaccines developed within the last 20 years. Many parents distrust these vaccines, worry about the potential for risks and long-term side effects. Research, however, shows that most of our biggest fears about vaccinations are unfounded. These 8 major vaccine myths that research has shown to be baseless. So before we get started, a lot of us have opinions about certain things, and it's tough for us to point to a credible source as to say why we have this thought or this opinion. We kind of like just have it. I think it's really important to think about where this thought or opinion came from. I think another thing to think about is, what would it mean if our opinion was wrong? If you could just consider that. What would it mean if our opinion was wrong? What would be the worst case scenario? That's just something to think about. Let's roll on over to the first myth. Myth number 1. Vaccines cause autism. The widespread fear that vaccines increase risk of autism originated with a 1997 study published by Andrew Wakefield, a British surgeon. The article was published in The Lancet, a prestigious medical journal, suggesting that the measles, mumps, rubella, or MMR, vaccine was increasing autism in British children. The paper has since been completely discredited due to serious procedural errors, undisclosed financial conflicts of interest, and ethical violations. Andrew Wakefield lost his medical license and the paper was retracted from the Lancet. Nonetheless, the hypothesis was taken seriously, and several other major studies were conducted. None of them found a link between any vaccine and the likelihood of developing autism. Today, the true causes of autism remain a mystery, but to the discredit of the autism vaccination link theory, several studies have now identified symptoms of autism in children well before they received the MMR vaccine. And even more recent research provides evidence that autism develops in the utero, well before a baby is born or receives vaccinations. Myth number 2. Infant immune systems can't handle so many vaccines. Infant immune systems are stronger than you might think. Based on the number of antibodies present in the blood, a baby would theoretically have the ability to respond to around 10,000 vaccinations at one time. Even if all 14 scheduled vaccinations were given at once, it will only use up slightly more than 0.1% or 0.1% of a baby's immune capacity. And scientists believe this capacity is purely theoretical. The immune system could never be truly overwhelmed because the cells in this system are constantly being replenished. In reality, babies are exposed to countless bacteria and viruses every day, and immunizations are negligible in comparison. Though there are more vaccinations than ever before, today's vaccinations are far more efficient. Small children are actually exposed to fewer immunologic components overall than children in past decades. Myth number 3. Natural immunity is better than vaccine-acquired immunity. In some cases, natural immunity, meaning actually catching a disease and getting sick, results in a stronger immunity to the disease than a vaccination. However, the dangers of this approach far outweigh the relative benefits. If you want to gain immunity to measles, for example, by contracting the disease, you would face a 1 in 500 chance of death from your symptoms. In contrast, the number of people who have had severe allergic reactions from an MMR vaccine is less than 1 in 1 million. Myth number 4. Vaccines contain unsafe toxins. People have concerns over the use of formaldehyde, mercury, or aluminum in vaccines. It's true that these chemicals are toxic to the human body in certain levels, but only trace amounts of these chemicals are used in FDA-approved vaccines. In fact, according to the FDA and the CDC, formaldehyde is produced at higher rates by our own metabolic systems, and there is no scientific evidence that the low levels of this chemical, mercury, or aluminum in vaccines can be harmful. See Section 3 of this guide to review safety information about these chemicals and how they are used in vaccines. Myth number 5. Better hygiene and sanitation are actually responsible for decreased infections, not vaccines. Vaccines don't deserve all of the credit for reducing or eliminating rates of infectious disease. Better sanitation, nutrition, and the development of antibiotics helped a lot too. But when these factors are isolated and rates of infectious disease are scrutinized, the role of vaccines cannot be denied. One example is measles in the United States. When the first measles vaccine was introduced in 1963, rates of infection had been holding steady at around 400,000 cases a year. And while hygienic habits and sanitation didn't change much over the following decade, the rate of measles infections dropped. That's an SAT word right here. Precipitously, Precipitously, Oh goodness, that's a heck of a word. Following the introduction of the vaccine, with only around 25,000 cases by 1970. Another example is the HIV disease. Again, HIV is in Bravo disease. According to CDC data, the the incidence rate for this malady plummeted from 20,000 in 1990 to around 1,500 in 1993, following the introduction of the vaccine. Myth number 6. Vaccines aren't worth the risk. Despite parent concerns, children have been successfully vaccinated for decades. In fact, there has never been a single credible study linking vaccines to long-term health conditions. As for immediate danger from vaccines, in the form of allergic reactions or severe side effects, the incidence of death are so rare they can't even truly be calculated. For example, only one death was reported to the CDC between 1990 and 1992 that was attributable to a vaccine. The overall incidence rate of severe allergic reaction to vaccines is usually placed around one case for every 1 or 2 million injections. Myth number 7. Vaccines can infect my child with the disease it's trying to prevent. Vaccines can cause mild symptoms resembling those of the disease that they are protecting against. A common misconception is that these symptoms signal infection. In fact, in the small percentage, less than 1 in 1 million cases, where symptoms do occur, the vaccine recipients are experiencing a body's immune response to the vaccine, not the disease itself. There is only one recorded instance in which a vaccine was shown to cause disease. This was the oral polio vaccine, or OPV, which is no longer used in the U.S. Since then, vaccines have been in safe use for decades and follow strict Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, regulations. And finally, myth number 8. We don't need to vaccinate because infection rates are already so low in the United States. Thanks to herd immunity, so long as a large majority of people are immunized in any population, even the unimmunized minority will be protected. With so many people resistant, an infectious disease will never get a chance to establish itself and spread. This is important because there will always be a portion of the population, infants, pregnant women, elderly, and those with weakened immune systems, that can't receive vaccinations. But if too many people don't vaccinate themselves or their children, they contribute to the collective danger, opening up opportunities for viruses and bacteria to establish themselves and spread. Not to mention, as the Centers for Disease Control, or CDC, warn, international travel is growing quickly. So even if a disease is not a threat in your country, it may be common elsewhere. If someone were to carry in a disease from abroad, an unvaccinated individual will be at a far greater risk of getting sick if he or she is exposed. Vaccines are one of the great pillars of modern medicine. Life used to be especially brutal for children before vaccines, with huge portions being felled by diseases like measles, smallpox, whooping cough, or rubella, to name just a few. Today, these ailments can be completely prevented with a simple injection. So, as science continues to advance and tackle new challenges, people should not forget how many deaths and illnesses vaccines have prevented, and how they continue to protect us from potentially devastating forms of infectious disease. Now, I'm going to be really, really honest with y'all. It's so hard to not argue why vaccines are good here. Hopefully that article was enough, but I got like so many points in my head that I could tack onto this article as to why vaccines are good and why they are the way to go. But the point of this episode is not really to convince you, it's just to educate you. So there are more articles out there that I encourage you all to take a look at. And let me sit back and say this. I think that whenever you have a point that you want to make, always look up outlets that disagree with that point. So obviously I'm obviously for vaccines, right? So I would go and research articles that prove that vaccines are bad. Although that this article basically just said there's been no credible evidence. There are a lot of different things that you can do to help rationalize your thought, right? But what it really boils down to sometimes is just you don't want to, and that's okay. But I have much more respect for somebody to come up and just say, I know nothing about vaccines. I just think they're good because everybody gets them. Or I don't know anything about vaccines. I just don't like needles. Or I don't like people putting something into my body and I don't know how it's made. I encourage everybody to just embrace that part of themselves. That if it's really that simple, then just say it. I think a lot of people lean on so many different things as to why they don't want to do something or why they don't trust doing something. When in reality, they just don't want to do it. And that's okay, but just say that. For everybody out there who wants to argue somebody down, before you do, at least consider their point of view. Hopefully, their point of view is an educated one and it's based in fact and they can articulate it as best they can. But I can understand how difficult it might be to try to have a productive conversation with somebody who just says, "Oh, I don't know what they're putting in there. I'm not doing it." That's tough. It's tough to have a productive conversation because then I will respond with, "Well, do you want to know what they're putting in it? Like, do you want to check that out?" I think at times what we do is, and I had a young lady, so I posted another poll and I'll talk about that in a second, but I had a young lady respond to that poll and she said, um, d- d- black boys, here, let me see what she said verbatim. I don't want to misquote her. Give me just a second. So this is an African American young lady. And her response was, vaccines are full of poison and they are especially designed to trigger genes and mutations in black boys up and are black boys 3 times more likely than anyone else. So I don't know where she got that data from. I don't know where she got that feedback from. I would be very interested in getting that information passed along to me, but someone had to tell her that. Like she had to see she had to go somewhere to get that information. And I think when you already don't trust somebody like the government or doctors or modern medicine, Western medicine, and you already have this natural distrust for people, places, or things, you're going to find whatever argument that you want to support that stance. I once had a friend who said his hygiene was horrible. He didn't like to shower. He showered probably like twice a week, maybe once a week, twice a week on a good week. You know, rarely took care of himself hygienically. Had a really, let's just say, dominant body odor, and was not had a funk about him. When I finally stepped to him about it and had a discussion with him about it, he actually went and found articles that like promoted his way of thinking. So, not to say that he was right or wrong, but if anybody wants to do something, whether it's something like being vegan or vegetarian, whether it's something like eating more red meat, whether it's something like living out in the country versus living in the city, you're going to find evidence that supports your point of view. You're just going to do that. I encourage all of you to step outside of that and try to find evidence that is opposite of what you believe and go from there. Now, you might be thinking, well, Tim, you just sat here and read me several articles that kind of promoted your stance. I would say this. The goal of me reading these articles was to provide enlightenment and insight into vaccinations and to also help debunk some myths. It wasn't necessarily to promote my point of view, but I can understand how somebody might take a look at that and view it that way. I will say that I did try to find articles that disproved vaccinations. I couldn't come across any. The closest one that I came across was this New York Times article that basically polled people, adults in particular, about vaccinations. and it expressed a lot of people's opinions about why they don't want to take vaccinations. But just like this public health article that we just read, a lot of people who have these opinions, they kind of just have them. It's usually hearsay. It's usually something that can't really be credited. It's not like a credible source. But I think it's really important to step outside your comfort zone. Step outside of what you think and just consider the opposite, even if only for a moment. That said, like I mentioned, I did have a poll. I posted a poll earlier about the COVID-19 vaccine and if you all would take it. So let's go ahead and read what the choices were, and then we're going to take a step away, and then I'll come back with the answers. So again, the question was, when the COVID-19 vaccine is available to the general public, will you be taking it? If so, how soon? So right now we have 3 of the 4 choices getting answered. We have absolutely not, yes, and as soon as I can, and yes, but I'll wait a bit. So I'm really excited to share these results with you all. I'll be able to go into detail on the other side of this break. I'll be right back. Alrighty, I'm back, everybody. So again, I posted a poll. This poll was on Twitter. I did also share it to my Facebook and Instagram stories. I also posed a question on Instagram, and finally I posted a video to to Twitter and to Instagram. So I encourage you to go and check that out. The poll is actually going to run until tomorrow because I did post it today. So it is going to stay up there for a little bit if you want to share your feedback. But again, the question was, when the COVID-19 vaccine is available to the general public, will you be taking it? If so, how soon? Starting with second place, how about we do that? Coming in at 25%, we have yes, and as soon as I can. So 25% of you, or a quarter of you, 1/4, say yes. As soon as this thing is available, I'm taking it. No questions asked. I'm getting it as soon as I can. And they're right, on top of it. Coming in at last place was 17% of absolutely not. 17% of you say no way, absolutely not. I am not taking this vaccination or this vaccine under any circumstances. No way, I'm going to be cool. And finally, we have 58, so over half, 58% of you said yes, but I'll wait a bit. So some of you are being a little cautious. You're like, yeah, I'm definitely going to take it, but I'm going to treat this like a new video game system and wait till they get all the bugs out of it first before I get my shot. And I can understand that, especially if you are coming from a place where you don't really know what to expect. I've said this before when it came to other topics, especially racism in particular. Fear drives ignorance, everybody. And ignorance drives fear. And the only cure for ignorance, for fear, is education. Just educate yourself about it. And then regardless how you feel, regardless of what your opinion is on the other side of that education, then at least you're educated. At least you can say that you put the time, energy, and effort into learning about it. And ultimately, health is bigger than us. It's not quite like if you don't believe in something, it doesn't matter. It could be one of those things where, hey, just because you don't believe in vaccinations, just because you don't want to get vaccinated, that's fine. But for the parents out there, you got to worry about your kids. You also got to worry about your kids going to school and being around others. There's a lot of different things to consider. I will also encourage you to look up some documentaries and some docuseries. Find out what herd immunity means. Take a look at these different things and then make your opinion. If your opinion is what it is, that's fine. But again, at least you're coming to the table with facts and with knowledge. That said, everybody, I'm really excited to get your feedback from this episode. Let me know, was I a little too harsh on the people who don't believe in vaccinations? Did I do a good job of educating everybody on what vaccines are and how they work? And finally, if you didn't get a chance to participate in the poll, respond to this episode. Respond on YouTube, respond on Spreaker, shoot me a message on Twitter or Instagram. Are you going to get the vaccine when it's available? Are you going to hold off, or are you going to wait a while? Let me know. This is always a pleasure, gang. I always have so much fun recording these episodes, and I cannot wait to see you throughout the course of the week. And keep an eye out on your news feeds and your YouTube channels, your YouTube notifications, as I'm going to be doing something special for episode 60. Nothing huge, nothing over the top, but I will be doing something special for episode 60. Until then, until next time, as always, I'll keep talking if you'll listen. Take care.